Hello and welcome to another AVR120 session. Today we're going to be going over how to add a force to an object and then set up a weapon swap script so that we can switch between weapons. So let's go ahead and begin. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is we want to, as I said before, apply physics forces to a target. So in a similar way that we apply damage to the target, we can also apply a force. So a force is just like in real life. If I push something, it will move. In our case, we are applying a force every time the gun hits something with a rigid body component on it. And we are going to use the add force method of the rigid body component. So if we go ahead and we take a look here, this is a built-in method on the rigid body component. And again, a rigid body is what adds a physics force to an object and interacts with Unity's physics engine. And what we'll go ahead and do is use this add force to add a vector3 force, and we can also select the force mode. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So what we'll want to go ahead and do is add this to the gun script. So if we go ahead and click on the rifle here, and we click into the gun script, we'll pop that up here. And we're going to create a new float variable. We'll call it public float impact force, and we'll set that equal to 40. And we'll go ahead and go into the shoot method here. And essentially, we want to check to see if the rigid body is not equal to null on the target. So we'll go ahead and we will add this into our shoot method below the physics.raycast. And we'll say if the hit variable, okay, dot rigid body is not equal to nothing. So we're checking to see if the rigid body component is on the object that we hit, okay? And remember, the raycast hit variable returns information from what we've hit with our raycast, okay? And remember, a raycast is a straight ray that shoots out from our camera in this in the way we've set this up in a direction that we indicate. So if we shoot a ray to an object, and that object has a rigid body on it, okay, so that rigid body component is not equal to nothing, then we will go ahead and we will apply a force here. So we'll access the rigid body and we'll use the add force method, okay, and we'll see it adds a force to a rigid body, and it takes a force, and that's pretty much all we're going to need to pass it here. So we're going to essentially, to kind of control the direction of the force, we're going to use this kind of statement here. So we're going to go ahead and say negative hit dot normal. Okay, and you'll see here the normal is the normal of the surface of the ray hit. Okay, so the normal we'll go over that in a second here, but we're doing the opposite of that, okay? And that will shoot a ray into the object, and we'll multiply that by our impact force. And that will give us a force that will push the object in the direction that essentially is the opposite of where we push it from. So if we're pushing it forward, it will go the opposite direction. And so let's go ahead and kind of review or take a look at some the normal terminology here. So we'll go ahead and take a look at mesh data. And so a mesh, an object's mesh is composed of three things. And so if we take a look in our scene here and we click, let's say, go to scene view and we click the house, we'll see that it has a mesh collider, okay? So a mesh, all right, is essentially what will be used to for more complex objects, all right, where a box collider is, or like a circle collider, a sphere collider, or just a cylinder is not going to be enough. We need to use a mesh collider to kind of create the essentially the faces of the colliders that we want to um, kind of display here. So you can see here when I hit this, the convex option, is this collider convex? Uh, don't worry about that, but this is kind of what I'm talking about. So if you look at the colliders here, this has a very specific shape around it, and it's composed of polygons there. So a mesh, all right. So that was a mesh that was on that object there. Is composed of vertices, which is a collection of positions in 3D space with optional additional attributes. It's composed of a topology, the type of structure that defines each face of the surface, okay, and indices, a collection of integers that describe how the vertices combine to create the surface based on the topology, okay. So vertices is just like, vertex. It's combination. It's just a point. Topology is the kind of think of topology of like a mountain or uh, something of that of just land. It's kind of the crevices and hills, kind of the different inclines of the faces of the surface of the structure. And then the indices is a collection of kind of the indices is putting those two together and kind of putting it in number form, and kind of gives us how um, the vertices and the topology combine to kind of create essentially values that we can use there. So with regards to the normal, all right. Um, so like the position, for example, right? The vertex position, okay? The position of the vertex in object space. So our transform is a vertex, right? We have three rays coming in on the object, and that is a vertex position, and that gives us the position in 3D space, okay? The vertex normal represents the direction that points directly out from the surface at the position of the vertex. So if two polygons, come to a point there in an object, the ray, there will be a ray that can shoot out from that essentially, and Unity will use this value to calculate the way light reflects off the surface of a mesh, okay? And the vertex attribute is optional. But essentially, for our purposes, the normal is essentially a ray that will shoot out from our object, and each face will shoot out in the direction that that face is kind of facing. And so what we're doing essentially with this line here is we're getting the negative hit dot normal. So we're getting the opposite of the normal. So if the normal is shooting outward, we're getting array instead shooting inward towards the object, and we're multiplying that by the force with which we are going to the impact force there, okay? And so what that will do is push the object in the direction, and in this case, in a direction. In this case, it'll push it in the direction of our ray. So if we're shooting our ray out from our camera, okay, which is representing kind of our viewport and our gun, it'll shoot a ray towards the object and then push the object towards the direction of the ray, towards the opposite direction of its normal. So its normal would be kind of intersecting our ray, right? It would be shooting out in the opposite direction of our ray, and then they would kind of meet where there's collision. But it's actually, we're applying a force that is the opposite of that normal, okay? So we're applying a force on our ray towards the object that will push the object in the opposite direction. So now it's a little complicated here. So let's go ahead and we'll just comment this out a little bit. So we'll say we are checking if what we hit from physics.raycast has a rigid body on it. If it does, we do the code below. All right, and then here we are saying we are adding a force to the rigid body. It will take the opposite of the normal of the object and multiply it by the force variable we created. This will push it backwards. Okay, and so now we'll go ahead and go back to our game, and we will save it and then press play here. And I think I need to have a reference here, so let me just check here. We'll go to the wooden crate here, just to make sure everything looks correct. Okay. And I'll go ahead and I will see that it applies the force when we shoot at it. And if I replay it, and I turn this up to say like 100, 1 second here, just checking a few things. Okay. And we'll go ahead and we can see that the object moves when I shoot at it. All right, but it needs to have a rigid body in order for me to do that. And so, you know, maybe the mass of the rigid body is a little too high. We could probably turn it down to like 0.5 or something. And we could go ahead and go to the rifle. We can leave it like 100 and it will have a pretty high impact here. Go ahead and click into the game and we'll see that it kind of launches. So that's how you go ahead and apply a force to a game object there. Let's go ahead now and begin working on applying a weapon switching script, which we will use to loop through our weapons. Okay, so we need to go ahead and we'll need the sci-fi weapons pack again. So go ahead and select your sci-fi weapons pack. Actually, let's go ahead and do this first. We'll go ahead and make a weapon holder game object on our main game object here. So we'll actually parent it to the main camera. So we'll go ahead and we'll right-click main camera, and we will choose create empty, and we will go ahead and call this weapon holder. We'll drag the rifle into the weapon holder here, and then we'll go ahead and I'm just going to grab all of these weapons here, and I'm just going to put drag them all into the scene. We have the rifle already. We'll put the heavy in there, and I'm just making this all a child of our weapon holder object there. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure they're all positioned correctly. So what we can do here is you can see that this is, you're not going to really see this in the game, and this looks all messed up, right? So we can actually just turn all of these objects off for now, and then just position the one object that we want. So this little checkbox here to the left of the name actually sets the object inactive, okay? We'll be using that in our script actually. So I've set these objects inactive, which means that they still exist in the hierarchy, but that they are no longer currently active in the game. So I'll go ahead and click the pistol here, And I'm going to just drag my game view out so I can kind of get a look at the pistol. Right now it's in a weird spot, so I will go ahead and kind of move it out a little bit, and I'll move it to the right and then kind of move it down like so. And that looks pretty good. Maybe more like that. And over a little bit. And I like how that looks right about there. So we'll need to do that for everything. So we'll go ahead and kind of set this inactive now and then go to the rifle. I think the rifle was the first object we have in there, so that looks fine. We'll go to the heavy and we'll set that active. That doesn't look great, so we can kind of just move it and position it how we want it. If you lose it, just go ahead and select it again in the hierarchy here. I kind of like how that looks there, so we'll leave it there. And then we'll go to the sniper, turn that on, and we'll just move it to where we need it to be. And there you go. Okay. So I think that all looks pretty good. And we'll go ahead and start working on our script now. So we're going to go to the weapon holder and we're going to create a script, a new script, and we're going to call it weapon switch. Go ahead and create an add. And we just need to double click the weapon switch script field. That's why it's not popping up. And in this case, we're actually going to go ahead and use start. So first, we're going to go ahead and create a public int variable called select weapon. We're going to set that equal to 0. All right, so now we'll go ahead and create a method called select weapon. We'll turn void and we'll call it select weapon here. And we want this to be called at the beginning of the code. So we'll go ahead and put select weapon here. And we'll call it at start before the program even begins. And what we're going to need in select weapon is an index variable. And this index variable, okay, will go ahead and hold the value of where we currently are in the loop, and we'll use it to compare if our current select weapon is equal to it. So here's where it's going to get maybe a little bit confusing, but just try to stick with us here. So we're going to loop through each weapon's transform in the game object that we have all the weapons parented to. Okay. So remember, this is on the weapon holder, and so we want to go through each child of the weapon holder. Okay, so which are the guns, and we want to say if the selected weapon is equal to the index, then we want to set that game object active or visible, which will make it visible in the scene and usable in the scene. Otherwise, if we are not on that weapon currently, we want to turn the weapon off so we don't have multiple weapons active at once when we don't want them to. So we will go ahead and set that up now. So we'll create a loop. We'll create a for each loop. And we'll say for each transform weapon, okay, in, we can call this weapon holder. Sorry, it actually needs to be transformed because this is the transform of the game object that we're currently on. So we will go ahead and check and say if the indexer is equal to the selected weapon, all right, then we want our weapon to be active. So we'll access, this is the weapon we're currently on in the list, and we want to set that active. Otherwise, if not, then we want our weapon to be inactive. And then we want to increment the indexer. So basically, as we're going through the weapon holder list, all right, if the current value of the loop that we're in, so if we're in the second loop, we want that, and that is equal to the second weapon, we want that weapon to be active in the scene, otherwise, and we want all of the other weapons to be inactive, so we don't have like 4 weapons overlapped on top of each other doing different things. All right, so then we'll go ahead and in update, we need to assign this to a user's input. So we'll go ahead and say if the input dot get axis, all right, so we're going to get the axis off the input class, all right, and there is an option for mouse scroll wheel, and we're gonna assign the weapon swapping to a mouse scroll, and we're going to say if that's greater than 0, which is going to be going if your mouse is scrolling upward, okay, because it's a positive number, then if the selected weapon, okay, if it is greater than or equal to the current object's um, child counts, the number of children the parent transform has. So so remember, this is on the weapon holder. So the child count, okay, of that. So all of the weapons, the total count of the list of weapons. So if currently selected weapon, okay, which we're incrementing every time that we scroll up on the mouse, or we will be, excuse me, and if that is greater than the total amount of weapons in the weapon holder object, all right, or weapon in the weapons list, all right, then we want to set the selected weapon. We want to set the selected weapon equal to 0. Okay. Um, Otherwise, we want to set selected weapon. We want to increment that. Okay. So let's review this one more time here. So basically, we're getting the input axis, we're setting the mouse scroll wheel, and we're saying that if we scroll up on the mouse, so if it's greater than 0, um, we're going to go into this if check, and we're going to say if the selected weapon is greater than the total amount of objects, all right, in the weapon holder script, and we actually have to put -1 here, and the reason being is because the objects will start at, the count will start at 0, okay? Because we've set it to 0 here, so we need the count to start at 0. Just like an array, the 0 element needs to be 0, so we have to subtract 1, okay, from the total count. So we'll say if the selected weapon is more than the total count, so if we, let's say we have 2 weapons in the script, all right, in the list, and we mouse scroll up on the second, when we have the second weapon selected, and we go to the third weapon, all right, if we don't have a third weapon, all right, then the selected weapon instead is going to go back to the first gun in our list. Otherwise, we are going to add to the selected weapon integer, okay, when we scroll up on the mouse wheel, okay. So basically, it will start at 0. that'll be the pistol. We scroll up on the mouse wheel, it'll add 1 to selected weapon. That'll be the next weapon, so the rifle. We'll scroll up again, that'll be 2. That'll be the next weapon, all right? And then all the way up, I think we have 3. We had 4 weapons in the object, in the list. So when it gets to the third count, okay, the third tick of selected, when selected weapon equals 3, okay, and we go up 1 more, it will reset selected weapon to 0 so that it goes to the first object in the list there. Okay, so a little confusing. We'll comment all this out and you can review it if you need to. So if we have this, all right, on the, so if we mouse scroll up and it adds to that selected weapon variable, which we're using to basically tell us which weapon we have currently selected, we need to do the opposite here. So we'll basically access the input class, okay, and we'll get the get axis, and we will instead get the mouse, or we'll again get the mouse scroll wheel, okay, but instead of saying that it's greater than 0, we want it to be less than 0. Okay, which means that we are going down in the negative direction. So if we're scrolling the mouse wheel down, if the selected weapon, okay, is less than or equal to 0, then we want to make the selected weapon equal to the last item in the list, which we will use this kind of, not get child, excuse me, it's child count, this to represent. So selected weapon will be equal to the last item in that list, right? The reason again being because if it goes from 0, 1, 2, and 3, right? Or if it yes, if it goes from 0, 1, 2, and 3, and we scroll down, so we're going from 3 to 1 and then 0, and then we scroll down and the mouse is less than 0, we want it to basically wrap around to the last weapon in the list, which will be the third weapon. And then otherwise, we want to decrement the selected weapon, okay? Instead of incrementing it like in here, we decrement it so that we are moving down the list as opposed to up, okay? And so if we go ahead and save this now, all right, and we go back into Unity, we will see that if I play this here, all right, and I use my mouse wheel and I scroll up, the number here increments. And if I scroll down, it decrements, right? But the weapons don't change. So now we have to set that part of the code up here. So we'll go back into weapon switch. And instead, now we will go to the update function again. And at the top, we'll create another integer called previous selected weapon. And we'll set that equal to selected weapon. Okay. And then at the bottom of update, we will go ahead and say if the previous selected weapon is not equal to the current selected weapon, then we will call the select weapon method. Okay? So again, to review, selected weapon is the variable we will be using to go ahead and we'll say stores currently selected weapon index. We'll call the select weapon at the beginning to start the loop. All right. At the start of the loop, we are setting the previous selected weapon equal to the currently selected weapon. All right, and then here we're saying this will we're getting the get mouse scroll wheel input from the player if it is greater than 1, increment the selected weapon variable. And if we scroll down, let's actually we'll comment out this select weapon because we wrote that first. So what this method does is it loops through all of the weapons under weapon holder. If the weapons index does not match the selected weapon, we want to disable it. And if it does, we want to enable it. Okay, so if this index equals the current selected weapon, we set the game object, we set the object active, and then we set the other objects in the list inactive, and then we increment the indexer variable. So back up here in update, when we scroll up, we will increment the selected weapon variable there by 1. And then here, we'll go ahead and say that we're basically doing this in the opposite mouse scroll direction, decrementing the selected weapon each mouse scroll down. Okay, and then for here, we'll say we will increment the selected weapon by 1 as indicated by our else statement. If we get to the max number of weapons, we will wrap, we will loop the value around to the top of the we will loop the value back around to the beginning of the list of weapons. We need to subtract 1 from the child count because count starts at 0. So if there is 3 weapons, we need to subtract 1 from that number. And then we can go ahead and for this one here, we'll say if the selected weapon is less than 0, selected weapon gets set to the last weapon in the list. So basically, if we can't go negative, and instead, if we go below 0, it wraps back around to the top value in the list there. Okay, so then now we've got to go ahead and finish this script here to get the we can go ahead and test this now, excuse me. And essentially what this section here is that if the previous selected weapon is not equal to the current selected weapon, we run the select weapon method to set the currently selected weapon active and all other weapons inactive. Okay, so now if we go back to Unity here, all right, and we save it and we play it, all right, we'll see now if we mouse scroll up, it changes the weapon. And if we look over here to the weapon holder, okay, when I scroll, like, so if I scroll up again, it loops back around to the pistol, okay? And if I scroll up again, it keeps going down up the list. And then if I scroll down on the mouse, it goes the opposite direction. So if I am on the sniper, it goes to the heavy, goes to the rifle, goes to the pistol. And if I go down one more time, it loops back around to the sniper. And we never go into the negative here. We never want to, if you're going negative, then you need to take a look at the script again and make sure that you're copying what I kind of put on there. Okay, so we've implemented all that now. We can go ahead and there's one more thing. I know this is kind of a longer video, but there's one more thing we want to add, and that is essentially inputs, all right? So that when you press the number keys, that the weapons get that they get selected. So if I have the pistol on the 1 key and I press the 2 key and the rifle's on that, it'll switch to the rifle. So we'll go ahead and set that up here. Double click this weapon switch script here. And inside of the weapon switch script, what we'll go ahead and do is you need to find the bottom of your mouse scroll wheel up. Okay. So after we are incrementing the select weapon, and we're going to run a check here to say if the input dot get key down, and we can actually use the key code class, all right, kind of like we did for the run, the sprint option. We'll click key code, and we will choose. If we scroll down, we can see alpha 1 is the 1 key on top of the alphanumeric keyboard. So that's the 1 key on top, like right above your Q. So we'll go ahead and click that now. And we'll say if that is the keyboard binding that you click, we will set selected weapon equal to 0, which will be the first item in our list. All right. And so we could go ahead and copy this entire thing. And we can just make another if check here. And we can set this to 2, and instead we'll set selected weapon to 1. Now we need to run an extra check here though to make sure that the weapon, there are no other weapons basically active in the list. So we need to go ahead and write and we need to add this here and the transform.child count. Okay, so that's the count of the total of the list is greater than and or equal to 2. Okay. And then we'll just comment this out here. We'll say the statement after the and is to check to make sure we don't have 2 weapons currently active. So we want to just make sure that we don't have the weapons, two weapons active here. And this is, we just want to make sure that we just essentially are saying that if it's equal to 2, then we have selected weapon equal to 1 there. And so we just can just recopy this here, do the same thing, and instead we're going to change the alpha to alpha 3. We'll change this to 3, and we'll change the selected weapon to 2, and then we'll go ahead and select the alpha to 4, and then this to 4 as well, and then we'll set this to 3. Okay? And so if we save this and then go back into Unity now, if we play it, we'll see that when I scroll my mouse button up and down, it works correctly. But if I'm on, let's say, my 1 key and I press 2, it'll go to the rifle. Or if I press 4, it'll switch to the sniper. If I press 1, it'll switch to the pistol. If I stretch 3, it'll switch to heavy. So we just went ahead and set up the numerical keybinds there for weapon swapping. And we can scroll up and down as well. So that's all working. And so that will do it for this session here. If you have any questions, let me know. I know that was a more complicated script, so don't be afraid to ask if you do have questions. Otherwise, just make sure you rewatch the video very closely and read the comments that we have put in the script as well. So thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your day and see you in the next session.